Good morning, everybody. This is Morgan Denny from the Institute of Clinical Excellence. And today I wanted to talk about kind of stresses, effects, and how we can help our patients with them. This PT on Ice podcast was actually kind of inspired by 9/11's anniversary happening last week. 9/11 obviously was a very stressful day for lots of people on this earth, especially Americans, especially New Yorkers, and I think that it was kind of the Kennedy assassination for my generation in time, right? It's the moment that everyone knows where they were when they found out about the news, right? So today I want to kind of talk about the idea of stress, because from that one event, there was so much stress that cascaded in that one occurrence, right? It was enormous and it continues on today. And I think that stress really encompasses fear and anxiety and some underlying senses of insecurity that it's difficult to get through, right? In that one single day, that one event, lots of things changed in people's bodies and in their minds that may or may not ever change back. So I think kind of in memory of those affected by 9/11, I really wanted to kind of talk a bit about stress today and how we can teach our patients to help them along through those stressful events. Because even though, September 11th was an actual 17 years ago, that's long enough ago that some people who are PTs now may actually not remember it. I still think that it's impacted so many lives and continues to impact those lives. So I want to just kind of talk about that, right? Because all of our patients have stress, and it's not a bad thing, But being able to key into just how much stress our patients are under and how they're perceiving it can really be paramount in helping them to manage that stress and understand that in relationship to their symptoms and to their overall health, right? And this is a piece that often gets missed by PTs and primary care providers alike. Talking to a patient, seeing their symptoms and understanding them as only, physiologic without taking into account how much stress that person is under. And folks who develop chronic pain, this is a big piece or can be like a fiber in the web. But for a lot of our patients who are just under acute amounts of stress, this can also be a large piece in how fast their body can heal, how their body takes on that stress, right? And also, stress can play a big role in how much that person's body has left to give in order to heal said injury or condition or whatever. And so I think it's a really important thing for us as clinicians to be able to ask about, to address, and to be able to help people understand how to manage their stress. Now, I know there have been PT on ICEs about stress before, and a lot of them have addressed the HPA axis and all of the changes going on in the brain and the nervous system when patients are under stress and how that affects or can amplify pain. But today I wanted to talk more about perspectives on pain and how people can kind of affect how their body is actually dealing with that stress versus the actual things occurring physiologically. And one of the first people I wanted to bring up is Kelly Mcgonigal. Don't worry, everybody, that's not a patient. That wasn't a HIPAA violation. Kelly Mcgonigal is a psychologist out of Stanford, and maybe 4 or 5 years ago, she was one of the first psychologists to openly take some of the new research and kind of bring to light new ideas about stress. And the main one, the key component, and you can actually go watch her TED Talk if you want another 10-minute version on this, that's very poignant. But her take-home point is that stress can have a lot of negative physiologic downstream effects. But if you view stress as actually a positive thing, a challenge, something to rise to, those effects can actually be negated. You didn't hear me wrong. You can literally change the physiologic effects of stress on your body simply by your perception, right? So that's her overall take-home point. And so that's something that I talk with my patients about all the time. That's not a way to address chronic pain. That's not the lead up, the talk you give people who've been in pain under that stress, have all these changes to their system for years and years. But it is something that I coach my patients on when they're in acute stresses. Whether they've had a new injury that's been going on for 2 weeks or so, and it's starting to affect, their nervous system, and you can see that they're ramped up. That they're, it's starting to affect relationships, stuff like that. And this is also something telling people like they can perceive stress as a more positive thing that can help when your patients are about to go through stressful events. For example, someone who's heading out to take care of a sick parent, or who is getting ready for a big job interview that they're really worried about, being able to kind of educate them that those are stressful events, certainly, but that they don't have to be negative, and that that can actually change the physiologic effects in their body, right? Because we know that stress is a big part of not only chronic pain, but also like can cause increased risk of illness, depression, cardiovascular events, among other things. Like there's a lot of stuff going on there. But some of the studies, and these aren't actually that recent anymore, a lot of them coming out around 2013, 2014, actually show that people who perceive their stress more positively or as a challenge don't have these, terrible effects on the body, right? So one of these studies, and this is again things that I tell my patients, some research shows that, you actually live longer if you're a more stressed out person. In looking at, I think they took around 30,000 people and just asking them a survey questions, the people who rated their stress levels as the highest and then were followed over years and years and years actually were the people that lived the longest. So if you feel like living longer is a positive thing, that's a good piece. Another research study looked at kind of meaning in life, right? So they asked the people, taking all things together, I feel my life is meaningful, and asked them to rate that statement, in terms numerically of how meaningful their life was. And then they had them rate their stress and how they saw their stress, right? And one of the main conclusions was that the people who had highly stressful lives but were able to perceive it as positive actually had more meaning in life and were those who rated their lives as most meaningful. So far, if you see your stress as a positive thing, a challenge to rise to, you not only live longer with high levels of stress, but also generally find more meaning in that life. Other studies have also found that, the effects of community service or giving back can kind of negate the negative effects of stress. So when your patients are under a lot of stress or feeling that like weight of the world, another thing you can do is just kind of encourage them to look outside of themselves, give back to something else, refocus that energy somewhere else, because that also can balance out the amount of stress that they're under and kind of those physiologic effects. They've also done, studies in rats that look at different responses in the brain. We know that you can have an improved immune response with a moderate level of stress, which is why when your patients are starting to get sick, it's a good idea to encourage them to go for a walk every day. Not to go run a marathon, but to still be able to stress their body physiologically so they can ramp up that immune response, right? So stress isn't bad, stress is not, the enemy. It's really just how we perceive it. So being able to kind of tell our patients these things and help them to get a new viewpoint on stress can not only help them feel a little bit better, but can empower them to feel like they're doing something different for their body. If you look at the people, the New Yorkers who were really in the thick of it during 9/11, there's a lot of stress and anxiety that's come from that. And there are people who probably will feel like they have never been themselves since that point. But there are also a lot of people out there who have risen to the situation, who have learned that the only way for them to deal with it, or the best way, is to deal it as that challenge. Like, it was amazing to see New Yorkers on the TV, coming out and saying, this is not something that will keep us down. We will build this city together and be stronger. And that's them taking stress, viewing it as a challenge, making it into something that they're using as something they can rise from and grow through and become better. And I think that that's a really positive way to see stress, and also kind of a lesson for us to be able to teach our patients that they also can use stressful events and use them to move forward, to get better, to be stronger, right? Now that said, even though stress can be a positive thing, too much stress can still be too much and very disruptive. And I think that while we can coach our patients to view that stress as positive, we need to remember to ask about levels of stress. Because some of our patients will seem stressed out, and when we dig into it, there are some minor things going on in life that we can help and coach them through fairly easily. But some of them have a lot of things going on. And sometimes being able to ask about the amount of stress that people are under can be really helpful, or figure out the amount of things that are kind of adding to that person's stress, and either be able to coach them to figure out what their priorities are so that they can either figure out one or two stressful things that they can let go for now or decrease their salience on, or give them coping strategies, ways to get through that, Like being able to give someone a little bit of control back can often be a great way to decrease stress. So if they're talking about their stress and it starts when they wake up because they don't have enough time to get everything done in the morning, so they're always leaving in a hurry, they're late, traffic's always bad, they get to work, their boss is like mean, I don't know, whatever. In that element of stress, if we can give them a piece to control, right? They're not going to be able to control the traffic, probably not going to be able to control their boss, but what if they get up 20 minutes earlier? Nobody likes to lose more sleep, but at the same time, it will take away that level of disconnect and increase their amount of control in the situation, hopefully allowing them to cope a little bit better. And that's just an example, right? So being able to figure out those little pieces, because, when there is just so much stress in a day, no matter how you're viewing that stress, that moment, in general, a lot of stress is a lot of stress, and that's going to be hard to cope with. Mike Eisenhart likes to use the analogy of a bucket, right? And every drop, even when it's a positive, good, magical drop, still overflows the bucket at some point in time, no matter what it's filled with, right? So finding those coping strategies and helping people to understand that there is a certain amount that maybe they can cut back on or take more control of can be really helpful. So some of the key points and beliefs that I like to educate my patients on include, viewing the body's stress response as helpful, not debilitating, right? So for example, when they're going into that job interview or they're heading towards, seeing that sick parent or whatever the stressful situation is, and they're starting to get anxious and they have an increase in heart rate and they, might be a little sweaty or nervous, those are moments that I coach patients to try to perceive that response as helpful. Perceiving that as like their body's getting ready, it's energizing, it's preparing to be able to take on the situation at hand, it's doing the right thing, as opposed to thinking, oh shit, I'm stressed out, this is terrible, I can feel my body, becoming more stressed, because that doesn't help. Like, we know that only amps things up. So being able to help them kind of perceive that a little bit differently, like Kelly Mcgonigal said, can really change the physiologic effects and how much their body goes into that stress mode. Secondarily, to be able to think about yourself as being able to handle the stress and learn and grow from the stress is helpful for patients, right? So if you can coach them to be able to say, okay, I know this is a stressful event and this is difficult, but I know that I'm going to get better from this. I'm going to be a better person who can handle a lot more after I go through this in a positive light. That skewing of things can also really help people to get through the event and then kind of make it to the other side and let their nervous system calm down instead of staying ramped up. And lastly, I tell people, remember that your stress is not special. Like, everyone goes through stressful events, and it's important to remember that all the people before you who went through stressful events didn't die. They were okay. They became great humans moving on. They found that meaning in life. They lived longer. Because when people remember that and can keep that in mind, it's helpful for them to think about themselves as one of millions and billions who have gone through these stressful events and been fine. And knowing that on the front end is really helpful to allow people to kind of calm their nervous system down in the time of the event and as things are going on. And as we know, stress really changes everything in the body. It can ramp pain up, it changes your healing times. So being able to help people to get through this and also just to train them so that during future stressful events, they have this perspective, right? That they know that they can make it a more positive effect is really, really an important thing that we as clinicians can learn to do. So this is a quote I got from an article that I just felt was really poignant, so I'm just going to straight up read it. Psychologists have found that the ability to embrace stress requires a high tolerance for ambiguity and uncertainty. You have to be able to understand the two seemingly opposite things that can be true at the same time. It can be true that going through something stressful can make you sick or depressed, and it can also be true that the same stressful experience can ultimately make you stronger, more compassionate, and more resilient over time. And I just felt like that was a great way to put it, It's like you really have to be able to accept as a human that stress that we generally have learned to perceive societally as this negative thing doesn't have to be, and that it can be both at the same time. And that's not always easy for people, but it can be super, super helpful. So keep in mind, guys, like gauging how many stressful events your patient is dealing with can really affect their recovery and their health, but so can how they perceive that stress. So not just looking at overall stress levels, but remembering Kelly Mcgonigal's work in kind of that perception of stress as seeing it as a challenge or positive, or at least letting go of our negative perceptions around it, can really help to delete some of those negative downstream physiologic effects that occur during stressful events. So I hope that we can step up and start to become those frontline clinicians that help patients to deal more effectively with their stress, not only because it will help us to change the healing time or how they're dealing with that one injury they're seeing us for, but also because we can start to have a big effect on people's overall general health and even help them to live longer if that's what they want. So in honor of today's talk about stress, and in terms of 9/11, whose memory of that day will stick with many of us till we die, hopefully a long time down the road if we perceive stress as positive, today's song of the day is With a Little Help from My Friends by the Beatles. So I hope you guys have a fantastic Tuesday. And remember, even if it's a stressful day, it's okay. You're going to make it. It's positive.